Okay, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us for what is sure to be an insightful discussion on leadership and leading through times of uncertainty with General Joseph Votel. I'm Christine Schwartz. I'm the CEO of Service to School. For those of you who are not familiar with Service to School, we are a veterans nonprofit, and our mission is to prepare veterans and transitioning service members for their next chapter of leadership by helping them gain admission to the best colleges and graduate schools possible. With that in mind, we are excited to host this discussion and bring together our community of veterans, students, and professionals as we continue to learn new skills, ideas, and philosophies to be great leaders. We'd like to thank Media Mobilize, who is sponsoring today's event, and give our gratitude for their commitment to the veteran community. Joining me to facilitate this discussion is Gus Jockman. Gus co-founded Service to School in 2011 when he was transitioning out of the military. He is the president of the Service to School Board of Directors and is a partner at Strategy & which is PwC's strategy consulting business.
Good afternoon, everyone. Very excited to facilitate this discussion with General Votel and with Christine. I wanted to just kick us off with a little bit around why this topic is important and why it's important for all levels, both from soldiers on the front line to our general officers and in business, mid-level, senior executives. I remember as a young infantryman on the plane to Mosul in 2005, feeling very certain. I felt certain of our mission. I felt certain of our training. And then I remember becoming a platoon leader a few weeks later, and then everything suddenly became much, much more uncertain. Is that car riding too low? Is that shepherd a spotter or not? And then now as a partner at Strategy & the uncertainty is profound and continues. And I help clients deal with it every day. The uncertainty of returning to work, the uncertainty of how to manage through a pandemic, the uncertainty of technological disruption. And so what I've learned is, one, that uncertainty is certain. Two, that if you feel certain, you're probably too young and you should check your assumptions. And three, it's important to develop a system to manage uncertainty in a thoughtful way. And so I'm very excited to have General Votel, who has so much experience in this area, help us, coach us, guide us around leading in uncertainty. So with that, maybe over to Christine for introduction.
Great. Thank you, Gus. Now, I am excited to introduce and hear from our guest, General Joseph Votel. So General Votel is the president and CEO of Business Executives for National Security. He joined BINS in 2020 after a nearly 40-year military career, during which he held a variety of commands and positions of leadership, including commander of U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM. In his role at CENTCOM, General Votel oversaw military operations across the region, including the campaign against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Before CENTCOM, he was the commander of the U.S. Special Operations Command, SOCOM, and the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC. He was commander of the 75th Ranger Regiment when they deployed to Afghanistan in 2001 and to Iraq in 2003. While assigned to the Pentagon, he organized the original IED task force that eventually grew into the Joint Improvised Threat Defeat Organization. During his military career, General Votel gained extensive operational experience across the Middle East, Levant, Central and South Asia, Northern Africa, and the Horn of Africa. He was awarded numerous medals of service and recognition throughout his distinguished career. And we at Service to School are fortunate to learn from his experience and his wisdom as a member of our board of directors.
Thanks, Christine. So, sir, I'll kick you off with our first question. With the pandemic, we've all been forced to make a lot of decisions in a universe of unknown unknowns. You've, throughout your career, have had to deal with that in very, very high stakes situations. I'm curious, when you have so many variables that are question marks, do you have a process for making decisions?
Thanks, Gus, and Christine. Thanks for the invitation to be here. I'm really honored to be here to talk with you guys and then talk with our audience. So thanks for the invitation to do that first right up front. So yeah, I think I do, although I never really thought of it as a process. I mean, there are some things I think that I've learned over time through experience and kind of the school of hard knocks on how to think through this. And what I would share with you is just a couple things, if I could kind of describe it as a process. first, I think it's really important for leaders, really leaders at all levels, particularly at senior levels, to find time to think about the things that they're dealing with without the burden of having to make a decision. So I'll just say that again. I think it's really important is the ability to think without having the burden of actually making a decision is really important. It was really important for me to talk with my staff about issues, about potential problems, about plans, about other things that were going on in the theater of operations where I was operating, and be able to hear that back and forth. That really gave me a lot of confidence when I did have to make a decision, that I understood kind of the background of it, and I kind of understood my staff and the subordinate commanders and others were on a particular subject. So I think it's really important first and foremost to make time up front to just think about problems without the burden of having to make a decision. The second thing is I think you have to as leaders, I think you have to focus on creating feedback loops. And you're going to probably hear this a lot from me today, this idea of feedback loops. And what a feedback loop is it is what it sounds like. It's kind of a leadership technique to keep information flowing between different levels of leadership. And the whole purpose of that is to make sure people are aware, aligned, and they kind of act in conjunction with each other. So you've got to build trusting relationships. You got to build confidence in people below you to share information up, and you got to build confidence with people above you with whom you're sharing information, trying to keep them informed. So this idea of feedback loops, I think, is really important. As you get closer to making decisions, for me, it was always really important to understand assumptions and perceptions. Frankly, I oftentimes, as a combatant commander, I'd call and talk with the chairman at the time, Joe Dunford, and we talk about assumptions. And I often found that the assumptions that people made at the DoD headquarters in the Pentagon were oftentimes different than the assumptions that we were making. And so, examining that and making sure you're good on that, I think is an important aspect. And then the final thing, I think, before you get ready to make a decision is just understand this idea of shared risk. Is that who else is going to be impacted by the decision that I'm going to make? I mean, if as a combatant commander, the Secretary of Defense, potentially the president or subordinate commanders, or if it's being made at a lower level, understanding who's affected by that and making sure that you've done the work to make sure that they're aware of what is going on. To me, that's really important. And then I think you're ready to make decisions about things. And so in terms of a process, I think that's kind of the way I think about it, and I thought about it, and I continue to think about it. Gus?
Yeah, sure. That's very helpful. And I know in the business context, we frequently talk about the shared risk and the dependencies, but we don't talk about the first one very much, being able to think without that burden to decide. And you bring the decision materials to the executive or the leader that has to make a decision, and they haven't had a chance to think through it very much. Maybe they've seen the materials in advance, but they haven't had a chance to really understand all sides. And like you said, be able to discuss and debate without knowing at the end of that meeting or at the end of that discussion, they have to say A, B, or C.
Yeah, no, I think it's to me, I mean, it's a luxury sometimes, but I think what you have to do in your rhythm of activities that you pursue on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, you have to build opportunities in to do that. And when I say think about problems, I don't necessarily mean sitting back in your chair with your feet on your desk. That's not what this was. I mean, to me, this turned into staff deep dives. We used to do something with our J2, the intelligence function there, where sometimes I'd pick a topic, sometimes they'd pick a topic, and we just talk about it. We'd bring some experts in to talk about a specific issue. I'd go down and talk with my plans and strategy people about things that they were working on and try to get their perspective on it. We built it into the rhythm of activity, so it was something that was repeatable and I could count on. And over time, I think the people that worked for me appreciated it as well, and they knew that this was an opportunity to impart information, but also to influence the way I was looking at things, which was frankly helpful.
Excellent. Christine?
Thank you. Yeah, looking forward to hearing more about the concept of the feedback loop. But our next question. So Decision-making during uncertainty is a continual challenge. Getting decision-making and the data required for decision-making to the right people at the right time. Organizations must balance risk with speed. You have organizations like Facebook who say, move fast with stable infrastructure. That helps balance the risk and the speed trade-offs. And you also have the concept in the military of the strategic corporal, the person that is on the front lines and low rank, but whose decisions can have a wide-ranging impact. How do you think about where, who, and how decisions are made in an organization?
Thanks. That's a great question. So let me just start with a quick story here. Is when I was a CENTCOM commander, I went to Shaw Air Force Base to meet with some pilots, and some that had just returned from Syria, flying over our troops, and some that were getting ready to go. And we were having lunch, and we just, there was about 6 or 7 of them and myself, and they were, captains to lieutenant colonels, pilots, and so we just kind of opened up and said, "Hey, who wants to go first?" And the youngest guy in the group, a young captain, spoke up first. And he had just returned from being a pilot flying an F-16 over Syria, where his responsibility was protecting troops on the ground. And what he wanted to talk about is how he was making decisions in the cockpit that could have strategic ramifications. He's flying in the same airspace as Russian jets, as Iranian ISR, as over a Syrian air defense system. So very complicated. But what he wanted to make sure was that how he was making decisions matched my intent. So in other words, what he was trying to do is really make this connection between the cockpit and the COCOM commander, and make sure that his decision making matched my expectations and my intent on that. And it really caused me to think. It was a really significant event for me as a 4-star commander, frankly, to have that discussion. And what I took away from that really, I think, really does inform how you think about decision making at a lower level. And it is that there is an inverse relationship between the level at which decision-making is made and where risk is being held. So said a different way, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get decision-making done at the lowest competent level, but at the same time, you're trying to hold risk at the highest required level. So going back to my little example, I mean, that young pilot he knew he was responsible for protecting troops on the ground. He knew he would have to make split-second decisions, but he was trusting that the guidance, the intent, the rules of engagement, the operating procedures, and everything that we put in place that, promulgated from my headquarters were the right ones that gave him the confidence to act. He knew he was covered. He knew he was empowered to act, and that the chain of command would have him. And I think that's a really powerful notion for decision-making here. And it emphasizes this idea of trying to get decision-making at the lowest competent level, the right level, but then making sure that the leadership above them understands, that this leader has the decision-making authority, and they have addressed the risk, and they are providing the wherewithal, the support, the trust, the risk management to enable that person to make a decision at a high level. And of course, again, back to the feedback loops. This is incredibly important in this, of people moving information all the way up and down. Oftentimes, I found myself in situations where you had a very fluid situation that you're moving through, and we had to do what I kind of called iterative storytelling, or in an iterative narrative, where I know a little bit of information. I don't know everything, but I'm sharing what I know right now. And you're keeping people informed up and down the chain of command in this, and that's another way, I think, of really reinforcing this idea of allowing subordinates at the right level, the lowest competent level, to make the decisions, and then providing that trusting risk management envelope around them. Really important, I think.
Sir, there are a couple things there that really struck me. One is you mentioned the connection between the cockpit and the combatant commander. And that sounds like the lunch was kind of a feedback tool that you use to be able to create that connection, to be able to get the feedback and the information flow from the lowest level to the highest level.
I think you're right, but I have to tell you, the lunch was much more substantive than I actually thought it was going to be. Normally, if you're going to talk with I'm not damning pilots or anything else here with this, but so I expected to hear concerns about rules of engagement and things like that, and how we were, managing resources and stuff. I kind of expected that stuff. But what this young captain did is he just cut very quickly to the chase, and frankly, really the kernel, the essence of what we really wanted to have happening, in this complex zone here. So it was extraordinary discussion.
And so I wanted to maybe probe on that a little bit, because the other thing that was really insightful was, the decision at the lowest level and the risk at the highest level. And you mentioned the importance of building trust. This is a lot of officers have to read the book Once an Eagle, and you have, one officer who's the great officer builds trust. You have another officer that doesn't build trust, and he's successful in many ways, even though he doesn't build trust. And I'm sure throughout your career, you have seen officers maybe under your command or above you that don't build trust, and maybe they use the positions to, promote themselves or to make themselves look good. How do you think about building trust in environments where, maybe there are leaders that don't see the importance of that? And I ask this because, once you're outside the military, and even in the military, but once you're outside the military particularly, there's different kind of, codes and cultures and ways of acting that don't always value trust between juniors and seniors, and, don't have the same ethos that maybe you created in your units.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, at the risk of being a little bit short on this one, I think if, there comes there's a little bit of tolerance for that. I recognize leaders learn as they move forward and they gain experience, I've been in the Army at a time when we were kind of a zero defects organization, and where we did not tolerate this well. That if people made mistakes, it was, you couldn't make an honest mistake in the pursuit of higher things. There was this unreasonable expectation of accountability that went along with that, and so we had to overcome that. And my personal belief is, just looking back in the Army, when we really embrace things like mission tactics and mission orders, then and with that, really, I think, and I saw this. I was a tactics instructor at infantry school, and we really started emphasizing that back in the 80s, and it made a big difference. All of a sudden, you had this appreciation for subordinate leaders being able to act within the confines of commander's intent, and understanding what it is to get done, and then empowering people, and getting them to do it. So I think that's what you have to do. I think when you find a leader that is having trouble with that, I think it's really important to quickly get to them and start talking with them about this, and trying to modify that behavior as quick as you can. And if you can't, then I think your options are relatively limited here, that you have to, depending on what you're doing, you have to get that person out of the chain at some particular point, and get him into something else, get him or her into something else. I think it's really important, and leaders have to be on the lookout for those types of things all the time.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. And then, PwC is recently reorganizing their businesses into a trust business and a transformation business. So the importance of trust, building trust with clients, businesses building trust with who they're serving, especially with all the privacy issues and things like that, is top of mind for many businesses. Sir, you've been a pioneer in the concept and application of asymmetric warfare. And that the idea there is a smaller competitor can be more nimble or more agile and has certain advantages over a larger competitor. In business, we've seen technology create the same asymmetry. So technology allows a smaller competitor to overwhelm and to beat larger competitors through scale, through speed. As you've studied and implemented, these concepts in asymmetric warfare, what lessons have you learned that might be abstracted to business?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I appreciate you characterizing me as a pioneer. I would also share with you, I think I'm a victim as well of asymmetric warfare. When you think about things like IEDs, back in the day, in the time frame that you talked about in Iraq, certainly relatively cheap tool here. And we spent billions trying to defeat it and trying to address it. Same thing with UAVs. My gosh, UAV you can buy for a couple $100 employed by ISIS, and we're shooting it down with missiles that cost tens of thousands of dollars. That's really a good example of asymmetry. But we've also been able to apply it. When you look at a campaign like ISIS and how we approached it in Syria, using small teams linked with indigenous forces. That was asymmetry employed by us on that. But when you look at asymmetry in that, I think in my estimation, there's 4 or 5 key things that jump out of it that I think are really important. First and foremost is this idea of effectiveness and smallness. In small numbers, there really is. I'm not just talking about efficiency. I'm talking about effectiveness. Your span of control is reduced. The number of the supervisory aspect of that is reduced. So I think there are a lot of advantages that come with smallness, and sometimes smallness was mostly in numbers, but it's also in how we make decisions. It's also in the processes that we apply. You think about somebody like Stan McChrystal and the idea of sharing information very widely. In my view, that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to lessen the opportunities for people not to be informed by sharing widely, and so this idea of effectiveness and smallness. The least amount of communications, but communications that go wide. Really a way of doing it. The second thing is, one of the advantages of asymmetric approaches is that they're simple, cheap, and they're easily replicated. I think if you look at business, you look in the private sector, I think those types of things, I think there's a real quality that comes along with that. They're reliant on, asymmetric approaches I think are reliant on simple communications, simplified chains of communication, simplified ways of communication, downward focused leadership and decision making. I think really are characteristic of that. They prioritize relationships and creativeness, and they expect people to figure out ways of working through these problems. The examples I think we cited with you are examples of creativeness. You look at a bomb, and a roadside bomb. It's usually a munition that's found, and some wire and some kind of remote control device, and that's about it. So it's pretty simple in terms of how you're creative in terms of how you do that. And I guess the final thing is I think that asymmetric approaches and those that articulate them or employ them, I think have a real good understanding of emotional intelligence, and they understand the impact of things that they're doing, and the impact that it's going to have on others. And so, from my perspective, as I kind of think about these unconventional approaches, those are the things that kind of jump out for me, Gus.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. And there's so many parallels. Effectiveness and smallness. You have the idea that I think Jeff Bezos made famous of the 2 pizza team, right? A team no bigger they can split 2 pizzas and everyone has enough food. They're relying on simple communication, relationships, and creativeness. The agile approach that a lot of businesses are trying to implement is an attempt to focus on relationships and focus on creativeness. So a lot of fantastic lessons there. Thank you, Christine.
Yeah, that was great. I think a lot of those points have really been front and center this past year. Simplicity and an emotional intelligence. All of a sudden we're working from home and we're not going into these big offices. What can we remove? What can we simplify? And emotional intelligence. We're all in this pandemic together or crisis together, and how do we read our employees and our coworkers and make sure that they're comfortable or we're all on the same page. But yeah, so on to the next question, which is still a little process technology based. So digital transformation and new technologies increase the volatility and the uncertainty of what workers need to learn and do. This requires businesses to rapidly upskill and retrain large swaths of their workforce to remain competitive. How did you think about upskilling and training soldiers to deal with new threats, and how might that be applicable outside of the military?
Yeah, again, another really great question. And I think when you think about some of what we just talked about with these asymmetric threats that we dealt with, um, what I, it was really important to be able to do this. I guess I guess how I would answer this question is by saying that, one of the most important skills that I had to develop as a senior leader was learning to trust more technically enabled subordinates. That we're always going to be much more savvy. We're going to be much more focused on working through technical solutions to address things. The most effective solution that we developed against UAVs on the ground, and we had companies and services and everybody else sending us stuff into Iraq and everything else, but it really took like an E5 and the 82nd Airborne and figured out a really effective way of taking this device that we sent to them, putting it on a mask, and pointing it in the direction of this thing, and he kind of figured it out. So I think sometimes our people are so good that I spend a lot less time thinking about, well, how do I make them smarter so they can deal with this, then I spend more time thinking about how do I get out of the way so we can leverage their ingenuity and their creativeness and the natural affinity with technology that they all appreciate. I think it's really important. I think from a more of a process standpoint, I think it is, as you look at the things that you're doing and how you're doing things, whether it's in the military or whether it's in business, I think it's always important to look at your processes, understand your processes of how you're doing things, how you get A to B, how you turn this into that kind of stuff. Understand where your gaps are, and then looking at it from an executor standpoint. I would share with you the example of JSOC as a military example of this. When we first went to Afghanistan in the 2001, 2002 timeframe, very effective, and this is a highly trained organization here. But what we learned over time is that we had to change the way that we were going after terrorist organizations. We couldn't just go out and go get this guy, go get that guy, go get this guy. We really had to move to network warfare, and it took a complete transformation of the organization in terms of that. And it wasn't so much, I think, about upskilling and training soldiers as it was about getting them into a position to have influence into the process and the ways we were doing things. There's a very famous slide at JSOC that used to go around. It was literally the back of a napkin drawing by an operator that basically says, "Hey, this is how we need to combine the ISR with others, special intelligence, with strike assets to get after these networks on the ground." We literally drew it on the back of a napkin, and that became the model, frankly, for how we kind of design the network on network approach to defeating terrorist organizations. So I think the idea of upskilling and training soldiers is obviously a very, very important one, and you have to think about it, and you have to provide opportunities for that. But in many cases, I think the role of the leader is to understand your processes, understand where they're not meeting your objectives, and then create the environment, sometimes just by getting out of the way, to let your more creative people in your organization, who are generally going to be younger people, actually begin to address the problem.
Sir, that's, when you mentioned that, there's a couple threads that are kind of common that I'd like to highlight. So one is the trust, right? The trust has to be there for that, that sergeant in the 82nd or that operator in JSOC to kind of share the ideas. There's also this concept that a lot of businesses are trying to figure out how to use, which is this idea that just great ideas come from everywhere, and in fact come from the front line, the equivalent of the front line in business. How to crowdsource, how to get the problems out there and get your frontline employees answering them. At PwC, we have a concept called citizen-led innovation, where we create a marketplace with digital tools, with ideas where the front line of a business can go in and be citizen-led and lead from the front and say, hey, here's the ideas, here's the tools, here's how we need to innovate to make our business better. And I'm curious, as a follow-up to that question, for that E5 and the 82nd, that operator in JSOC, what kind of, what was in place to allow their ideas to kind of bubble up to the very top? Were there any systems or tools? Part of it is the ethos of the military. I remember in training, if you put a private behind an area and that's not the right position for that private will be the first to tell you, hey, you got to move me over there. This doesn't make any sense. So some of that is the ethos, the NCO ethos to tell people what the right answer is. But were there anything you'd highlight in terms of systems or culture that allowed the environment for that, that sergeant in the 82nd or that operator in JSOC to come up with these citizen-led ideas that had such a positive impact?
Yeah, I don't know if there was anything particularly unique in that. I think we just had an appreciation for that. I think it goes back to many of the things that you're highlighting right now. Probably everybody on this webinar has watched Shark Tank at one particular point, and this is a good example right here where you look and you embrace people that have innovative ideas, are trying to solve problems, and I think that kind of mentality is really, really important to recognize creativity, to recognize mavericks in your organization. So, Secretary Mattis, General Mattis used to talk about this all the time, the importance of embracing people who are mavericks, who are pushing out ahead. Sometimes they'll get out there and they might get you in a little bit of trouble here and there, but that's a part of an organization growing, and you have to allow some of that to occur, for an organization to move forward with that. And the leaders got to be involved and got to be paying attention to it. But it's through these kinds of ideas, people to think differently about things. People in the private sector, look at any number of business books here, and you'll see examples of people that thought different. The book Loon Shots, for example, really good book here, but it talks about these ideas that were considered absolutely outlandish at one point, but over time became brilliant ideas, brilliant applications. So you have to have an appreciation for that, and you have to embrace that, I think, as leaders, and promote your mavericks and allow people to be creative and move forward. And I don't think there's any particular secret sauce to that. I think it's really about a mentality of trying to let the best ideas rise to the top in organizations.
Yes, sir. And you've spent a lot of your career in special operations, and that's that is one of the benefits of having. There's this perennial argument of does special operations take the best of the infantry and other MOSs and kind of siphon them off into this unit, and the argument against that is you create something special, and this maverick nature improves the entire force. So that's an interesting point. One other thing, sir, is we talk about culture. And at Strategy and we define culture as ways of thinking, feeling, believing, and behaving that define how things work, how you do stuff. When you're trying to deal with uncertainty, how do you think about culture? Is there any particular mindsets, beliefs that you inculcate in organizations to maintain uncertainty? I think you've highlighted a number of these. This promotion of mavericks, some of the other kind of recognition of the creativity that help do that. Anything else you'd like to share in terms of creating a culture that can manage uncertainty well?
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think understanding culture and promoting the culture of an organization is really an important aspect of overcoming uncertainty. And when you look at uncertainty, I think of uncertainty really as essentially a problem of communication. Uncertainty is oftentimes not the threat that we're dealing with. China doesn't represent uncertainty. We know exactly what they're doing. ISIS doesn't represent uncertainty. We know exactly what they're doing. But what causes uncertainty are lack of information, or oftentimes too much information. What causes uncertainty is conflict between different parties, different individuals. What causes uncertainty is ambiguity, or subjectiveness in terms of how people are looking at this or different interpretations of what is happening. Now, these are the things that cause uncertainty, and these are fundamentally communication issues. And so that if you buy into that, then the role of the leader, I think, is to address those communication issues. And I think first and foremost among that is culture of the organization. This really, this collection of beliefs, values, ideology, mindset, core mission of an organization that I think really, is really the innate first response of an organization to deal with uncertainty. So, I'll give you a few examples here. When I moved from SOCOM to CENTCOM, I really spent a lot of time trying to understand the culture of the CENTCOM headquarters. Obviously, I've been around it a lot, and in and out of it and all other kinds of things like that for a long time. But what the core of that organization was they had the ability to handle hard things routinely, because they did it all the time. That is this concept of warfighting excellence. They just were doing that all the time. They could take hard things and they knew how to deal with that kind of stuff. And so, that was the culture of the organization. When uncertainty presented, they kind of had this way of kind of stepping into it to try to understand what the problem is and then figure out how you begin to move through that. At JSOC, I would, at the time I was there, I would describe, and before I was there, I would describe the culture as a culture of accelerators. The organization thought of itself as somebody, as an organization that identified a problem and then moved forward in solving that problem, and in doing that, brought everybody with them. And that was the whole idea. We got this problem right here. Here's what we need. Here's what we need to do to address it. We need others to help. Let's get everybody going. And they really used that idea of being an accelerator to bring everybody along and move towards problems, solving the problems here. So culture, I think, is really important. It really represents the first response to dealing with uncertainty. It's hard to figure out. You got to spend time looking at it. It's different with every organization. It really kind of gets down to what's this core purpose? What's this core quality that the organization has that differentiates it from others? And when you can find that, then what you want to try to do is make sure you leverage that and appreciate it and inculcate it, as you move forward. So to me, the culture aspect of this is just extraordinarily important.
Yeah, and I think, I have never thought of uncertainty as fundamentally a communication problem, but as you described, being uninformed, being overinformed, conflict and ambiguity, all those really are at their core issues with communication. I've seen so many executives kind of cloak themselves in ambiguity so that they don't have to be pinned down to a decision one way or the other, and they can never be, blamed for it. So the trust comes back, and the communication, the importance of communication comes back to the forefront of dealing with uncertainty and being able to, like you said, put those things in place where you have trust, where you have communication that can really eliminate some of those root drivers of what causes uncertainty in organizations.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sir, so we are really fortunate to have you as a board member at Service to School, where mentorship is a huge part of our program. Who do you look to for mentorship, both past and present?
Yeah, thanks. It's a good question. I would be hard pressed to tell you if I had a specific mentor, but I've had a lifetime of really great examples set for me, and I've been fortunate to work with people and for people who encourage an attitude of learning and adapting and always taking on new ideas. And what I found as I became more senior is that leadership became more simple for me. It became, it really became the basics. It came about relationship building. It came about communicating well. It came about how you interacted with people on a day-to-day basis, above and below you, and so it really boiled down to it is really simple. But your question is about who do I look for those types of things, and I got a lot of examples, but I'll share three quick ones with you. I had a command sergeant major. I had the same command sergeant major when I was at JSOC, when I was at SOCOM, and when I was at CENTCOM. We were together for 8 years, which, by the way, is longer than the average American marriage. So Bill Thetford and I were together for a long period of time. I just think so much of him. I mean, he has these qualities of quiet competence. He's very thoughtful in the terms how he looks at things. He exudes quiet, calm leadership. And to me, I mean, he was a great source. And I tried to use him a little bit as a directed telescope, but he was a great trusted confidant. I mean, I just learned so much just watching how he conducted himself. So, that's one right there. I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again about Bill McCraven, Admiral McCraven, Bill McCraven. And what I learned about from him was, well, I'll just share a quick story here. So when I took over SOCOM from him, I was being promoted from 3-star to 4-star. And I went to him and said, "Hey, you got some advice, as I become a new 4-star?" He says, "Oh, sure, come on down and I'll talk to you about it." So I got myself down to Tampa and got to the man's office and got in a chair right in front of his desk and got my notes, got my pen and paper out there. I'm ready to take all the great words that he has to tell me. He says, "Okay, here's the advice. On the very first day that you're a 4-star, call every other 4-star by their first name. Don't hesitate." And I thought, what the hell are you talking about? That's not, how can that be good advice? But when I thought about it, what it is, it's quintessential McCraven, because what it is about, it's about confidence in yourself. What he was basically saying is, you've arrived, you're here, you're in a position of responsibility, so act like it. And be confident in yourselves. And of course, Bill McCraven's the guy that can convince the whole administration in an election year to put it on the line and go after bin Laden on 70% intelligence. So this idea of confidence is really important. And I really learned that. It was reinforced to me by Bill McCraven. And then I'll just share with you quite unashamedly, one of the best leaders that I know is my wife, Michelle. Frankly, both of you have met her at one particular time, but she has this right mixture of hardness and softness. I mean, she can put a boot in your rear end quicker than you know, but she also has the ability to operate at the other end of it as well. She's got extraordinary empathy. She has the ability to connect to people. She's never been in a position where she had to be a leader of a major organization, but she really exudes these kinds of qualities here that I think are just so important. So, I think the important thing for people, you may or may not have a mentor, somebody that you kind of go to all the time, but you're around people all the time and you're picking things up, and you have to be adaptive and you have to learn as you move forward on this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Michelle's on top of my list as well, sir. And I'm surprised Admiral McCraven didn't tell you to make your bed. That's the number 2 piece of advice that he always he likes to put out there. Great. So, what I'd like to do is maybe open it up for some questions from our audience. So please feel free to ask in the chat or ask in the Q&A. And let me relate. I'll just kind of do these in time order. There's some great questions here. We have a soldier that was in 3rd Battalion, 10th Special Forces. And he mentions, some of your, capabilities being at the forefront of bringing the new generation of SF soldiers and technology to the front line, to get into the soldiers' hands. And what he's interested in is, for someone who is post-service, how can they stay connected? How can they contribute within the Special Forces or USASOC communities? What would you recommend to soldiers that want to stay connected and want to continue to kind of give back and serve post their military service?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. First off, to this person here, thank you for your service, and really appreciate you joining us here today. I think there's a variety of different ways you can look at this. I mean, one of the really fortunate aspects, I think, of a country being at war for 20 years is that we have a great respect for those that serve, and we've seen a whole new explosion of organizations that are designed to help veterans, help people do their jobs. So, and help make an impact, bring attention to the problems associated with service to to the nation. And so, first and foremost, I would encourage you to look for one of those things. When I retired, I tried to align myself with service school because I believe in the mission of what they're doing. And for me, that's a kind of a way to support and hopefully kind of give back to that. But I think there's a ton of great organizations out there. If you're interested in trying to help with technology and stuff like that, there's tons of companies out there, startups, mid-sized companies in particular that are come up with innovative solutions. And I think reaching out to them, I think is another important way to share your experience. I mean, being out of the military now for a couple of years, I think there continues to be a great desire for grab people who have service experience. You can talk about it from the executioner's standpoint here and provide that perspective. And where you can, I think that's important. And then, of course, I think you just kind of keep your eyes peeled on what the opportunities are, at both JSOC, SOCOM, and CENTCOM. We had a coterie of civilians that were absolutely essential to the things that we did. In many cases, they were people that had served and they wanted to continue to be aligned with it. And they got themselves into positions in those headquarters where they continued to make a difference. And in addition to making a difference on data, they provided incredible continuity for the organization. So, I think there's a variety of things that you can do there.
Absolutely. Another question around how or what advice you would give for coming together as a team when this pandemic has kind of fractured a lot of the team dynamics, a lot of the in-person team dynamics that you need, a lot of the maybe in-person training, those kind of things. Any advice you'd give our audience and how to kind of build a team during this kind of year of the pandemic?
Yeah, I do think that this has been a challenge for a lot of people. I've just seen it in the little organization that I lead, where we've been working remotely, and how you try to keep people connected into this. What we've tried to do through this is try to keep as much of a routine as you possibly can, and look for opportunities to enjoy each other and share the things that you're doing. We were doing about once a month staff updates, and during the pandemic we went to weekly updates, and we instead of just bringing the leaders in, we brought everybody in. And so what we were trying to do was make sure everybody was connected, everybody knew what was going on, everybody had an opportunity to interact and things. And so situations like this, I think, are really kind of call for extraordinary leadership and trying to identify ways that you just kind of create opportunities for people to be together, to communicate with each other, to demonstrate the value to the organization, and really to stay engaged. And I think as you kind of move through this, I think it's really incredibly important to kind of continue to do those types of things. And then when you can, begin to move back to the normal, more routine things that you're used to. But for me, I think it's about preserving habits and trying to keep things as much as you can the same, recognizing that you may not have the physical touch with people, but you can still replicate, I think, a lot of those things.
Mm-hmm. Sir, another question: How did you transition your leadership style from when you retired, a 4-star general, to becoming the CEO of business and executives and national security of this kind of for-profit, nonprofit type group? Did your leadership style change as you went from the military to this company?
It may have. I actually hope that it didn't. And for me, I kind of said that earlier in response to one of Christine's questions here, is that as my military career moved on, I mean the aspects of leadership that were most important to me became much more simple. It became about relationships. It became about communications. It came about how you interacted with people. And so, what I've tried to do, I think, is try to try to hold true to those kind of things as I kind of stepped into this environment. Certainly working with people that are not in a military structure is different, but it to me, in the organization that I'm part of right here, I mean, we've got people that have been on the staff, have been with the organization for 20 plus years. They know a lot. And so like anything, it's important to get in and listen to people, to understand what they're telling you before you start changing things. And that I think most of us would do that if we were in uniform. At least the most effective leaders that I've seen have done that. Try to understand what's going on in an organization before you immediately start coming in and mucking things up by making changes that may or may not be warranted. I think the same thing is on this side. You have to demonstrate to people that you understand what they're doing, that you appreciate what you're doing, you respect what they're doing, and then you kind of create a level of respect back and forth. And then you begin to look at how things kind of change. And sometimes that goes faster than others. I had the good fortune as I came into this to be part of, even before I was in position, to be part of a kind of a strategic review to look at what the organization was doing and where it was going. And that was really, really important to understand, know the organization, know where we needed, where its vulnerabilities were, know where its strengths were. And that really set me up well for, making decisions and changes and, or continuing to move forward as we were once I did get in a position.
Absolutely. So maybe one more question before we kick to Christine for kind of the final question. And this one's actually quite near dear to my heart. It's not quite about uncertainty, but we know discipline is the backbone of the military. Having discipline and being able to operate in a disciplined way. But I think any of us that have been in extended periods of combat know that there is the parade field discipline, and then there is combat discipline, and they can be different things. For example, I was in the Battle of Slaughter City, and we didn't get resupplied for 3-4 weeks, right? So we were filthy. We went out there with the uniform we had. We didn't shave. We didn't realize it was going to, be a battle that it was. And our leadership understood, and it wasn't, hey, let's take a minute from fighting the Jaish al-Mahdi to go get a shave in, right? But we were a disciplined unit. People understood that, and we balanced the need for discipline with the with what was going on in the battlefield. You've had a variety of experiences in the regular Army as well as special operations, which, is the SF beard and, that has all those things that people kind of look at and say, oh, what's the discipline? How do you think about discipline in terms of the parade field, uniform regs, customs, courtesies versus what some of us have experienced on the battlefield, which is sometimes the short hair isn't gonna stop a bullet?
Yeah, no, I think to me it's about understanding what's most important here, and trying to prioritize those things. When I was the Ranger Regiment commander, we went through a big discussion. At the time when I was a Ranger Regiment commander before us, we used to wear these goofy haircuts called high and tights. And it was kind of what we did. So every Sunday, everybody got a haircut. It became the first formation on Monday with this goofy haircut and everything. And we went through a process of trying to decide whether we ought to just go to regular Army standards. And we had misidentified that, I think, and we didn't make the right decision at the time. I'm disappointed to tell you. Ultimately, my person who succeeded me did, and I think it was a good decision to do that. But we conflated those types of things with being as an aspect of discipline, when really it was more of a practical matter, and it really had very little to do with this. I remember having a discussion with a senior officer. We were trying to make modifications to our uniforms. After we'd been a couple of years in Afghanistan, we put patches. We took the pockets off the bottom of our BDUs. We put them on our shoulders because they were more accessible to people. And I remember having a discussion with someone who's going, "What are you doing?" That's I like units that don't do the. Listen, it was about effectiveness, frankly, and it was about kind of doing the right things, that listening to people and trying to adapt to those kind of things. So I think it's really important to always look at what standards in organizations, what you identify as standards. I think are always important, and I think it's critical to look at the priority of those things, the importance of those things, and make sure that you're not conflating minor things with important things. Haircuts are not major things in the long run thing. What is important is how people responded, things that they did, their preparation for the things you were asking them to do. That was much more important. It had very little to do with with the appearance aspect. So I think it's important to just always understand what your standards are, and the things that are what are the unmitigated things that you can't reduce, you can't do without here. I think we've all learned that over the pandemic here, that there are certainly things that are much more important than others. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, sir. Thank you for joining us today and having this great conversation and discussion, and leading or leaving us thinking about high and tights. I can't say I'm sorry that my husband doesn't have a high and tight, but I will leave with one final question, which is, after all of your leadership experience in conventional units and also in special operations and now in business, what would you leave people with on being a good leader?
Thanks, Christine. Yeah, so I would just share a couple things with you. First and foremost, I think it's important to trust your instincts. You accumulate wisdom over the course of your life, over the course of your career, and all of that should kind of go into your brain, and it informs the things that you're going to do. And you should learn to trust yourself. Be confident in your own judgment with this. I think it's really, really important. Most people know the difference between right and wrong. Something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. So learn to trust your instincts. You wouldn't be in important positions of leadership and other things like that, or where you are today, if you didn't have good instincts. The second thing is, I think it's always important to use whatever position you have or rank that you have for good. I always try to remind people of this when they were put into command of an organization, or they took on additional rank or additional authorities and responsibilities, that the reason those things are given to you is so that you will use your position for good, for your soldiers, for your employees, and for their families. And so, I would always encourage people to, use whatever authority, whatever position you have for good. And you have to think about it like, if you don't do it, nobody will. So use your position for good. Third thing here is take care of yourself and take care of your family. I've unfortunately experienced this in the military, where people, officers or non-commissioned officers, they give it all to the organization, and somewhere along the line they end up losing their families, and they begin to lose a little bit of themselves with that. And I think it's really important to kind of figure out how you find balance with that stuff. As a leader, I found that people were looking to me for how I was balancing my professional responsibilities and my personal responsibilities. And I'm not proud to tell you that, or I'm not too embarrassed to tell you, I didn't always do a great job of that. And it took a long time to do that, to figure that out, and to figure out what the balance is. But it's really important to not lose sight of that, to take care of yourself. It's okay to have a professional life and a personal life. And as leaders, you have to model that for the people that are following you. And as individuals, you have to remember that at the end of all of this, when people pipe you off the parade field there, it's down to you and your family. Should never lose sight of that. And then final thing is just to be a happy leader, be a satisfied leader, be a leader that makes the experience of serving in the military or serving in an organization, a private organization, both a positive and a rewarding for those that are serving. To me, I think this is absolutely essential. You've got to find ways to have organizational fun. You've got to have ways to let the organization enjoy what it is and what it does. And leaders really have to play a role in doing that. And I think you do that by being a happy, satisfied leader and promoting a positive and rewarding environment for those that are around you. And I would just say, the one unambiguous indication that it might be time to move on from whatever you're doing is when you don't enjoy it anymore. And fortunately, I haven't reached that with anything that I've done. But to me, that would be a pretty big indicator. So be a happy leader, be satisfied with what you're doing, and exhibit that, and find ways to bring that satisfaction to the organization that you're leading. Thanks. thanks, Christine. It's been great to be with you and Gus today and with the whole group.
Great. Thanks so much, sir.
Well said, sir. Thank you. And thanks all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.